Welcome to Entre Nosotras, Latina Voices. Today we're honored to have one of the candidates running for House District 76, Ms. Elisa Tamayo. Ms. Elisa Tamayo, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Peregrino, for having me. I'm very honored to be here.
Thank you. So in this show, we want to get to know the candidates for this position. Could you start out by telling us a little bit about your background for the viewers?
Absolutely. So I'm running for District 76 as a first-time candidate. Born in El Paso, raised across the border. I'm the daughter of Mexican immigrants, a first-generation American. My mom was a special ed teacher and my dad a small business owner. And so I understand the ins and outs of our community. And I believe that it's important that we have representation that is reflective of those values and of those demographics. And so I started my career in Representative Blanco's office. I started as a field representative and moved up to become the district director on his district office here in Viscount. And I was there for 3 years, and then I moved on to work with Senator Jose Rodriguez in his district office as well as the Director of Constituent Services, and then moved on to the Capitol office as the office manager and scheduler during the legislative session in 2019. And now I'm running for office myself.
Okay. And what helped you decide to run for office?
I'm so glad you asked that question because I never thought I was going to run for office myself. Doing all this background, all this behind the scenes kind of work, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed serving the constituents through elected officials' office. But I never saw myself as a candidate. But I think after what our community has gone through, we need people that are more reflective of the community and who can say, it's okay to be an immigrant, who I believe that we need that kind of representation at the Capitol, because I don't think that what happened in our community in August was an isolated attack and something that somebody just decided to carry on one day. Like, this is the result of the negative rhetoric that we see coming from state leaders, from nation leaders that have attacked the border for far too long. They say that the border is not a safe community, that immigrants are criminals, and we all know that that's not true. We know that our community is a safe community and that we bring a lot to the table. So to me, it was about time for someone to stand up against that negative rhetoric and say, no, it's okay to be immigrants. This is who we are. And we're going to tell our stories through our elected officials in our own voices. And we're not going to let anybody else, disperse lies about who we are.
Okay, that's wonderful. So speaking about the border image and rhetoric, I think it's important to have someone with that particular point of view. Could you talk about where you got that passion for the border? What in particular made you an advocate for our region?
Yeah. So I grew up, going back and forth across the border. My dad's lifelong dream was to live in the U.S. He knew that this country afforded security, opportunity, and many things like the American dream, what many people have always looked up to America for. And so he was no different than many of those. So me and my brother were born in El Paso for that reason. And we came, to doctor's visits. Our pediatrician was here. We enjoyed summers here, but we had to live over there because my parents couldn't legally work and live in the U.S. That changed in 2010, so about 10 years ago when we were finally able to move here and they got their permanent residency. And my dad opened up a branch of his small business in this community to, provide jobs and give back. That is, I think that experience is something that is not unique in El Paso. That is something that a lot of El Pasoans share, and they understand, the border wait times. They understand what it's like to have family over there but live here, or spend weekends over there, or live there and come to school here. So there's all these dynamics that I think are so unique and special about the border that we should be talking more about.
Okay, great. And briefly, you mentioned that you've worked for Representative Blanco and for State Senator Rodriguez. What do you feel that you got from those work experience that have prepared you to run for public office?
Yeah. So I think what has prepared me to run for office is not just what I learned through Senator Rodriguez and Rep Blanco's offices, but also my experience through even student government. I was part of a student government when I was a UTEP student, and everything prepares you at some level, but then there's other things that you kind of have to learn as you go. You're never fully ready to run for office, but I am encouraged by other young people that believe in this, that they know that it's not about me, that this is about electing people that are coming with me within this movement, that they want to be a part of the process, and whether it is like volunteering a few hours of their time, chipping in like their $10, $20 hard-earned money for these people, but that they're doing this because we believe that we need better representation. People are, like I said, more reflective of the demographics of this community. And so I think that, those, definitely helped to have worked in the legislature before running for office. But I think everything has been a great experience, like from student government to helping in my dad's small business, to doing community service work through, different organizations, the Lions Club, the Centennial Women's Centennial Lions Club, and things like that. Everything prepares you. And what I want to say to students is like, you're never going to be fully ready to run for office, but we need people who care. I think the bottom line is we need people who care and who really want to serve this community.
And so tell us a little bit about House District 76.
So House District 76 is a very diverse district, very close and dear to my heart, because I was born in District 76, and I know that it's very diverse. So it starts from Copia Street, south of I-10, all the way to Zaragoza 375. And north of I-10, it starts on US 54 and ends in Yarborough. So most of the district is south of I-10. We cover like the heart of El Paso, Lincoln Park. We have 9 different high schools, from Jefferson High School all the way to Isleta High School. So it's really diverse. We have the Cielo Vista area, the Walmart where we had a tragedy happen in our community. So there's a lot going on in District 76, but it's a very welcoming community, I would say, very friendly, and some of the hardest working El Pasoans live in District 76.
And so if elected, what are your 3 biggest goals for the 2021 session?
I know there's a lot that we're going to be facing next session, because on top of my 3 priorities, there's also redistricting, and we want to make sure that we have fair maps and that we do our best to keep our representation, because in El Paso we are not growing as fast as other communities are, and we might have to fight to keep our 5 state representatives for El Paso. So I know that is a big priority on top of my own legislative agenda. So I'm going to be, following the census closely to make sure that we get those results in, and that we do, like I said, like fair maps, and that we use that information to in benefit of our community. But my 3 priorities are better access to healthcare. Texas, and El Paso specifically, has very high numbers of uninsured people. Many people that don't have healthcare access, including children. I think Texas is unfortunately leading the way in the number of uninsured children that we have, and that should not be the case. So I want to fight for Medicaid expansion, for lower prescription drug costs, and better access to reproductive and preventative healthcare services. So that is healthcare is a big one for me. Second priority is public finance, public school finance. We need to make sure that we're putting enough money in our public schools, so that the students and teachers have the resources that they need to be successful, but also to watch after the taxpayer. The reason that we have really high property taxes is because the state of Texas is not putting enough money or its fair share into our local school districts, EPISD, YSD, and even EPCC, and they haven't received enough funding from the state. And we need to do more. We need to make sure that the state of Texas is fully funding our public schools, so that they don't have to raise the taxes, because that is what's happening, is that they don't get enough, so they have to turn around to a local taxpayer and raise property taxes to make ends meet. So that has to change. So that is why that is another big priority for me, is to make sure that Texas is putting in its fair share into our public schools. And then, my third priority, I always talk about this because it's so it's still in the hearts of many El Pasoans what happened. That senseless tragedy that ended with 22 innocent lives at that Walmart is something that we have to address, and we have to make sure that we close some of those gun regulation loopholes. So whether it is universal background checks or extreme risk protective orders, we have to do more. We cannot fail Texans in the fight against gun violence. We need to make sure that we're closing those loopholes, that guns don't end up in the hands of criminals, and we prevent another tragedy like the one that we saw in our community and that we have seen across Texas, because we were not the only ones. We saw in Odessa, in the Houston area. Sadly, this keeps happening. So there's something more that we should be doing to address these things.
And so I'd like to touch back on some of the points you just made. For the students that might be watching that don't know why the census and redistricting is important, could you talk about that so that they understand, in case they don't know what why it's a priority?
Yeah. So the census happens every 10 years, and that is where we count our population. And we, especially in border communities like El Paso, if we don't get an accurate count of the population, we are putting at risk billions of dollars in federal funding for transportation projects, because these numbers that we get from the census are used for many things. One of them is the redistricting, or the appropriate apportionment of districts and representation. But also like funding from the federal government for a lot of different programs. And I say transportation because that is a big one in our community, and we're very challenged in the funding that we're getting, and that is because we are often undercounted. Unfortunately, communities of color and minorities, they're scared or hesitant to fill out the census or participate in the census. And when that happens, we're undercounting our population. So, that means we're not getting our fair share of resources. So that is one thing. But then when we talk about redistricting, it's the same thing, that we're not counting enough people, and so we're getting less representation. Or our districts become larger and more gerrymandered, and they shouldn't be. So we need to make sure that, one, we have an accurate count and a complete count of when it comes to a census, and then two, that we have good leaders that are not going to shy away from fighting for representation in our community, keeping our 5 state reps in El Paso, to make sure that for the next 10 years, we have voices fighting for us and making sure that we get our fair share from the state.
And you talked about Medicaid expansion being one of your priority issues. Do you think that's feasible?
Medicaid expansion? I think so. I'm very hopeful that next session we're going to be, if we don't flip the House already next session, that we're going to be closer to Democrats being in the majority. Democrats have been the ones who have been pushing the most for Medicaid, but we have seen some Republicans try to join in the fight and make this more bipartisan. Because it makes sense. It makes sense to have more people covered through health insurance. This is not just the people who benefit out of Medicaid expansion are not just the direct recipients of Medicaid, but everybody else. When we have more people covered through health insurance, then the providers and the hospitals are getting in that revenue, and they can provide better services. When you get a lot of people that don't have health insurance, they sadly still end up in the ER. And they have to increase the healthcare premiums for everybody else to make ends meet and to bring in that revenue to account for the ones that don't have or don't pay their medical bills. So it makes human sense, because I believe that healthcare is a human right, but it also makes economic sense to have more people covered through health insurance.
And so you brought up also the issue of women's healthcare, because here in this show we also care about women's issues. Could you talk a little bit about your positions on women's issues? Are you pro-choice?
Yes, absolutely. Definitely pro-choice. I believe in a woman's right to choose, and we need to do more to make sure that this is not also a disadvantage for low-income women. We can have abortion laws or make abortion legal, but if our minority women don't have access to those services, then this becomes a social injustice issue. And we need to make sure that minority women have the same access as more affluent women to have safe legal abortions. And that is when critical services like Planned Parenthood come in. And we have to make sure that as elected officials, we are supporting these kinds of services. It's not just about abortion, but like everything before. It's sad that Texas has some of the highest maternal mortality rates, and we think that the women's health care starts at pregnancy, and it doesn't. Like, it really starts, like, this is not a maternal mortality issue more than it is a women's healthcare issue, because we need to be more preventing, on the preventing side of things. And so services like cancer screening programs, like reproductive health care, preventing things even before a woman gets pregnant. So we need to look at this as a women's healthcare thing and not just like maternal healthcare. So to me, it is like, yeah, we need to definitely push more to support our communities, especially underserved communities like El Paso, because we're not getting enough, and we're not doing enough, and we're failing young Latinas, young women of color in their lives, because this becomes a life choice. And so I just really wish that the Texas legislature would put more funding into these kinds of services and really look at this in a holistic approach and not just a unwanted pregnancy approach.
Lastly, you also talked about gun violence and prevention. Do you think that that's feasible in the next session, given some of the incidents that you mentioned, especially the one here in El Paso?
Yes, I'm really hopeful that we can accomplish more next session, because even gun owners and even Republicans agree that we need to do universal background checks. So I don't see a problem with passing something that is clearly supported in a bipartisan fashion. Clearly, gun owners have, their service, and there's facts behind this. This question of, yeah, we should have universal background checks. We shouldn't keep arms and weapons from the hands of the wrong people, and we can do more on that. So I don't see a problem, especially given everything that has happened after the legislative session ended in 2019. We had two attacks, like the El Paso shooting and the Odessa shooting. And so I think that was a wake-up call, and I was glad that the governor started the conversation through the roundtables. But we need to do more. So we need to take those conversations and those select committee hearings that we've been having across the state. We need to take that and put it into action. So I'm really hopeful that we can, like I said, transition into not just a conversation, but actual legislation to close some of those loopholes and take those first steps to ending gun violence, or at least keeping weapons from the hands of criminals.
And so just for the viewers that might not know, what's the gun show loophole?
So right now, Texas has some of the loosest gun control laws. We don't have background checks. Anybody who's 18 years old can purchase a weapon, especially private sales. So there's no control on gun owner to owner private sales, and that's something that it just makes it so easy for people to have access to firearms, to assault weapons, and that shouldn't be the case. I think that we need background checks. That is a given. Many states have that. We should do it in Texas. We could prevent a lot of the things that sadly are happening if we just take those first steps.
And I think you make a good point there, because even Senator John Cornyn, when the shooting at Sutherland Springs happened, the church shooting, that person had been at the Air Force at Holloman and had a domestic violence case, and so he should have never been allowed to buy a weapon, but because it was never entered into the database, he still went ahead and did that shooting. And so I think you bring up a point that I think is very near and dear to our community. And so moving on into maybe a less controversial topic, I know I know you've been endorsed by members of almost all the current representatives for our delegation, and could you talk about what that means for you?
Yeah, that means A lot to me because when I first decided to run for office, those were the very first people that I went on to ask for their support. I know that they would be my future colleagues, and I know that there's a lot of collaboration required to pass statewide policies. So I wanted to make sure that I got the support of my future colleagues if I get elected. Sat down with each of them individually, talked to them about why I was doing this. Same thing I just talked with you about, having that story shared through an elected official and the reasons why I'm doing this. And so I was very honored when one by one they decided to support me. And, because you do need to work with people in the Texas legislature to make things happen. You can't, it's not a single man show. When you go over to the House floor, you need to have people on your side to vote for your things, even amendments, bills, trying to kill the bad legislation. You need people on your side. So to me, it was very important that I got their endorsement and their support, and I'm honored to have it. There's only one member who hasn't given an endorsement yet. I think he tries to stay away from giving out endorsements. But everybody else, Rep. Blanco, Senator Rodriguez, Speaker Moody, Dr. Rep. Mary Gonzalez, they have thrown their support behind me, and I'm very honored that they have. But I've also received endorsements from other community leaders, firefighters, teachers, and even people that throw in their small donations towards our campaign. That's an endorsement, and that's something that I'm excited to share, because that means it's not about me, it's about other people jumping in this movement with me and knowing that we can do this together for our community.
And so you mentioned that you've received the endorsement of one of the teacher associations, or?
Yeah, so El Paso AFT. And also the statewide, the Texas AFT, they have both given me their support, and they, working together in the campaign to get elected and get across the finish line, and then work in some of the priorities for teachers, and even like for retired teachers, to keep the promises that were made to them when they first signed up to this profession. And so I'm excited to work with many of our local teachers.
And that was one of your other policy priorities, getting school funding.
Yeah.
And so there have been some moves here locally to get some charter schools to come into our area. What's your position on charter schools or school privatization?
Yeah, I believe that we need to hold charter schools to the same accountability standards if they're going to be using taxpayer money. We need to be good stewards of the taxpayers' funding, and what we can't just allow free passes on schools, and that is the issue I take with charters, is that they get to cherry pick their students. They don't have the same accountability standards as public schools, and that's something that needs to change if we want to bring more of them to our community. So as the regulations towards charter schools are today, I stand against that, because like I said, I believe that we need to be accountable to the taxpayers. We need to make sure that we're being fair and that we are using their money wisely, and making sure that we have a public school system that works for everyone, regardless of their zip code or background. And the issue I take with the charter schools cherry picking their students is that we're creating separate systems, right? And we know that separate but equal does not work. The Supreme Court already ruled against that in the Brown versus Board of Education back in 1954, I believe. And so we know that this separation of students does not work, and it shouldn't. We have to have something that works for everyone, regardless of zip code or background, and also making sure that we get the same good quality education for anybody for the same tax effort made. And that's why I support public schools. And sadly, I cannot support charters as of today, because they need to be held to high standards as well.
Okay. And if there was a push at the state level to push for vouchers, or even maybe from the federal level, what's your position on vouchers? Going back to the accountability issue, I don't agree with school vouchers, because again, it is taxpayer money that we as elected officials are responsible for and need to be good stewards of taxpayer funding. People who want to use private schools, they should pay, or if they can afford it, I mean, that's great. They should pay
for that quality education that they want to seek, but I don't want to create systems that are, again, separate but equal, and we need to make sure that we're being responsible with the taxpayer money.
Great, great. And so we're kind of coming towards the end of the first part of our show,
Okay.
and we'll continue our conversation with candidate Elisa Tamayo. So before we end, do you want to give a closing statement about why you're running for this office, or why are you the best woman for this job?
Awesome, thank you. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I am very grateful that I was able to be on your show. EPCC means a lot to me because it gave me an opportunity, at the American dream. This is where I started my career. If I hadn't had my GED from EPCC, I would not have been able to go to college and perhaps have the jobs that I was able to get after college because of that quality education. And so I'm honored. I want to thank you again for having me, and I want to ask your students and your viewers for their support in this election. It means a lot to me to be able to run for this seat, and I want to bring good representation to this community. I know that we are hardworking El Pasoans that deserve a strong voice at the Texas Capitol, and we deserve to bring those resources for our community, to fight for what's fair, and I'm grateful and honored, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being a guest. And so remember, early voting starts next week, February 18th through the 28th. You can visit epcountyvotes.com to find your early voting location. Or if you're a procrastinator, you can wait until March 3rd, which is election day, and you vote at your precinct. And so hopefully you decide, this gives you a little insight into one of the candidates. We're also working on trying to get the other candidate to come to have a show to give her policy perspective. And then remember, whoever wins this primary will be the representative in the fall, because there's no Republican running in November, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for being our guest, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.